Yeah.
Oh well.
Oh well.
Oh well. Okay. Well, I want to get done with verse 8 on this. Although I just have a little bit more to work with it, and definitely I don't see the new guys, so we had some new people that were showing up, which is kind of fun. But anyway, these words, I didn't get 2 words a day, so I gave you the same words of the day. Sorry, but they're some of my favorite ones. It's what I want to start with anyway. Pistos. You know, I'll just say it again. I have to say this again. This is a word that we translate to believe. To believe. But it doesn't mean anything close to that in Greek. Why do we have to say we believe when this word means to convince? Convince. You know, as a matter of fact, today, I'm going to just throw this out. You know, today in the Christian world, if you say anything about belief, right? It's all a matter of faith. Well, it's a matter of faith in Buddha or, Gandhi or whatever, Islam. It's all a matter of faith. It's what do you believe. Well, that is not the Greek at all. It's to be convinced. So if we're going to be New Testament scholars, or at least be honest about the New Testament, every time we see the word believe means to be convinced, which is astounding to me. And of course, the word faith is pisteo. This is the verb, to be convinced. But faith, the word that's translated faith, is pisteo, which is the noun, which means to have been convinced. So, ladies and gentlemen, what does it take to convince you?
Logical argument.
Yeah, well, I love to say that, logical argument, the logos to telos. That's what it's all about. The logos to telos is what Greek is all about. The Greek said, do you think a Greek person would listen to you if you were not telling them a logos to telos? Well, they might, but they'd want to know what you're saying, right? They'd say, are you giving me a femi? Is this your opinion? Are you doing a rima? Is this a story? Are you telling me a story? Is this a kaleo? Are you just giving me, are we just talking about the weather, right? But if you tell me I'm giving you a logos, which by the way, if you notice, how many times is logos used in the New Testament? Probably about 80% of the words that are used for say and said in the New Testament are logos, because it's a logos. The purpose. You remember? Well, today, if you were in the service this morning, the thing we sung for the Alleluia chorus, right? These things are written so you may be convinced, right? That's right out of John. So you may be convinced, not believe. It's very interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Sort of take devil's advocate, though. Why would you believe in something if you hadn't been convinced? Doesn't it sort of imply that you've been convinced of something if you believe in it?
I'll go for that, and I like that. I would reasonably agree with that. But the way that you're going is, I have a logical or reasonable argument, right? And I'm convinced of it, and then it becomes a function of my belief. Right?
Some people do sort of believe things by inertia if they were raised in it or something, and it's sort of come to believe, in our culture, faith is sort of like actually something we believe in the absence of evidence almost, is
Right.
what people think of it as. But.
Right.
And is that something, though, that when we use faith all the time in the Bible, it's almost something would be better, as Ann just said, without any proof of anything. I think that's how we interpret faith. And wouldn't it be more, wouldn't hope be more, a better term than to be, I guess what I'm saying is when we say faith, I think people assume that means we are, that we, without any evidence we can provide, we just believe, we have faith in this.
Right.
Whereas, and I think that almost, instead of using that, because we've got it so confused on this, that to be convinced by logical argument is what we say is faith, but that's not what it is. But instead of saying faith, you would just say hope. I mean, I hope something will work out. Okay, I hope that our vendor will come up with an answer to why I can't crack into the database and run these reports I've got to have with the next requisite. Okay, that's, I don't have faith, I'm not convinced, I've not been convinced by anyone's argument, including my own, that that's gonna happen. So now I'm grasping. But it seems like when we look at the New Testament now, that whenever faith comes up, that people are taking that as, they're not thinking of it as if they were convinced of something. They're thinking of it, well, because that's what I was told, or that's what I
It's our
hope to be
modern
true.
evangelical culture. We were
Right.
taught, we weren't at the crucifixion. We weren't present at Christ's birth. We weren't there. So therefore, because we don't have evidence, because
Right.
those are just stories.
Right. We also
Yeah, our
weren't there
Bibles
for the
are-
signing of
so-
Declaration of Independence.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, there
therefore,
are many
we
things.
can't,
Right.
that has to be a blind belief because we don't have any evidence.
And see, that's the
And
exact
that's the
opposite.
point, it's not a blind
Yep.
belief because we're being convinced by the argument.
Well, and see,
And
but that's, I hope because you've been in this class and also because we're getting better, I hope we're getting better, but I've not seen much evidence of it. But the big deal to me is, you know, this is why the Tübingen school is destroying even today what I think the church stands for. Because before Tübingen school, I've used that term before, right? Tübingen school in the 1800s stated, since there is no direct evidence, archaeological evidence at the time, for the New Testament or the Old Testament, therefore everything is a question of faith or hope,
Right.
not a question of logic. And so Tübingen school, which by the way was Lutheran, we can blame the Lutherans for this was our problem. And by the way, that idea has permeated. I would say about a class I should teach is a basic class in the evidence demands verdict, evidence of the facts of Christianity. Because I think today, for example, what's the answer you give? Well, what's the answer that appears to be the one that everybody wants you to give? Why do you believe?
Faith.
Faith, because the Bible told me so, right?
I want to
Circular
believe
reasoning.
it. It's something that sounds good to me.
Yeah, well, and I thought Pastor was pretty good about talking about this morning, and he's talking about authority. He says, well, what's your basis for authority? Well, the problem today is, have you noticed how people are reinterpreting?
That's what I want.
Well, we look at the Greek, and the Greek tells you exactly what it says, right? The Greek is concrete. But the modern view of the Bible is, well, give me my King James, or give me my new NIV, or give me my, you know, there's going to be new versions that come out that are totally, the translations aren't that great to begin with. Now what are they going to be in the future, right?
Well, the question is, what does this mean to
Emoticons.
you? What
Yeah.
does this mean to you? In other words,
What do you want it to say?
just reading.
What are my
I've been in
feelings
so
about
many
it?
Bible studies where they say, what does this mean to you? It's like, wait a minute. Just give me what does the original language say, and then we can talk about it. Because the English can mean a million things.
Right.
Sort of on this note, back a few statements to the archaeological evidence, you know, since that time, hasn't a lot more archaeological evidence and supporting documentation
Yes.
been discovered? So that puts a lot of those questions in question. Or-
Exactly.
So since that time, there is quite a bit of, you know, additional evidence to support a lot of things in the.
You're precisely correct. In the 1800s, when the Tübingen school started up, they were looking for evidence that demands a verdict. They were looking for evidence archaeologically of the New Testament and the Old Testament. And they immediately didn't find it. So their response was, there isn't any. Yeah, but since the 1800s, what have we discovered?
Dead Sea
Hundreds and
Scrolls.
hundreds of places.
Pilate's name, Dead Sea Scrolls. We've discovered, you know, Babylon. They discovered, you know, the walls of Babylon really were washed away by Darius's, you know, moving the water, right? We found all these pieces of evidence.
Caiaphas is ossuary, the ossuary of Caiaphas the high priest.
They found all kinds of evidence. Well, yeah, but you know what? You know what they keep lying about? I got this. Well, not this. I got Majority text, right here, majority text. You know, and every time we do a class, every time I do a class, right, what's the first thing I do? Well, actually, the second thing I do. I
Look up the validity of the
prove the veracity of the text. Because if the veracity of the text is good, that means we can trust it, right? This is your evidence. Even if you didn't have archaeological evidence, this is the evidence. It's not belief. It's not faith. It's, are you convinced? Pisteo. I mean, you know, this is what makes Christianity much different. And I won't go into huge detail, but, you know, for example, when were the earliest texts of Buddha written? Anybody have any idea? 100 years after Buddha was dead. None of his disciples were alive. That's when the Buddha texts were written. How about Tao? Tao actually wrote a lot of this stuff. You know, Confucianism, Tao. Confucius wrote a lot of this stuff down. He wrote it himself. So we have his information. We have his writings. But you know what? He wasn't... Confucius was more interested in what? Government administration. He wasn't a religious kind of guy, right? There are no religious texts. There are no texts about religious personalities or people that have anything that are close to the New Testament, written by the actual seers, the first-hand witnesses of it, in any religious group or people or anything, right? The closest you might get are Muhammad. But the problem with, what's the problem with Muhammad?
He copied us.
Well, it was only him who got the visions. Like, it was just him. And so whatever he said, you just had to take him at his word. And then his supporters would try to write it down on things, whether it was a leaf nearby or whatever, or memorize it. And then later there were 24 versions of the Quran after he died, and then they burned the other 23 after they picked the one. And so
Well,
we just don't really know.
I don't disagree, but what's the ultimate problem with the Quran? The Quran is a book of rules. Where, what are the New Testament? What is the New Testament? Every piece of it. It's history. Even the letters are history. The letters are letters written to groups about the times, right? About their beliefs or structure or whatever. How much doctrine is in the New Testament? How many doctrinal works are in the New Testament? 0. Matter of fact, they didn't include the Didache. We have the Didache in all of our stuff. We even sing hymns that came from the Didache. But guess what? It was never included in any Christian document list. We have it today, reproduced, redone. We have copies of the Didache. You can find them online. They're wonderful. But they were never included in Christian stuff. Why? The New Testament was not about doctrine. It was not about theology. It was about saving historical texts. The Quran includes how much history? A little, but what is the history that it includes?
Like Moses.
It's a copy of the Old Testament.
Abraham.
Yeah, and
it's a little different.
And Muhammad saw it, didn't he? Oh no, he didn't see it! That's the problem. Did he write about any of the history of his time?
No.
0. That's the point. Remember when I've written about different types of works? You have historical works, you have logical works, you have works that are written into reason. The Quran, for example, falls into the realm of religious works. In other words, books that try to explain about God. Does the New Testament try to explain about God?
Yes.
Really? Is there anywhere in the New Testament where it says, oh, I know we're talking translations now. Our translations, God is love. I think, is God is love? Is that one of the things?
Yeah, in 1 John.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly what it says, is it? It says, first of all, it doesn't use imo egi. Right? It doesn't use the imperative. It can't use the imperative. It says theos. I don't know what the verb is. I have to go look at the verb. I don't think it's icky. God, agape. What's agape? Yeah. Humans can't do it. So what does that mean? Right? It's meaningless without the context. So is it theology? Is that theology? I mean, for example, in English, if I say God is love, that is a theological statement, right? You say, well, how do you know? How do you know, according to the New Testament, in John, that God, theos, is agape? What's...
Historical sacrifice that he made.
Yeah, the historical sacrifice of Jesus Christ. That's the context of John. But guess what it does? Guess what the Greek does? Does the Greek ever tell you the telos? What do you have to have a theological argument? A conclusion. You have to have a conclusion. Why did the Greeks not include a telos, a conclusion, in any of their writing?
Because you're supposed to think.
The logical argument.
It's just right to it anyway.
Yeah, the argument is supposed to convince you of the telos without them stating it. That's why, you know, look, you have probably never heard, I hope you've never heard any historical person or theologian tell you the New Testament is a theological document. Because if they said that, they'd have a hard time proving it. That's hard to prove, that it's a theological document. Because it doesn't tell us about God, right? It tells us about what the people observed on the earth, right? If you say what Jesus said told us about God to a certain extent, right? But that's just his words. That's the historical writings of his words. It's kind of the Old Testament. Is the Old Testament a theological document? It's a historical document, and what does it tell us? Do the authors of the Old Testament tell us God is like this or God is like that? What do they relate to us all the time? What they saw happening in their time, right? Well, I have Psalms, right?
Yeah, they have poetry, and they do say God is like whatever. And
Psalms
not
and
in the
Proverbs.
historical books necessarily, but
In Psalms.
yeah.
In Psalms,
It's usually as a form of praise more than anything else.
in a form of praise. Yeah. You see, now what have we done? I mean, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but what have we done? We took a euphemistic prayer, which is very euphemistic in Hebrew,
We tried to concretely theologize it.
and tried to concretely make it theology. As a matter, that's what, remember when we studied the Psalms, if you guys were in the Psalm class, and we went through the Psalms bit by bit, excruciating bit by bit, right? Well, I hope they weren't that excruciating. But when you look at it, you see, these are works of art. They're works of art. Now, I'm not taking away anything from saying, okay, you can make your own theological conclusions, but guess what I always say in this class, right? That's your homework, right? If we look at concretely what things say and then try to figure out exactly what they mean within a cultural context, take theology, that's cool, theology and doctrine, but remember, these are supposed to be historical documents, and therefore, we are looking for the logos to tell us to those historical documents. And I don't mean to get way off on a tangent, that this really isn't a tangent, is it? This is the whole purpose of this class, I think. Let's look at these other words. How do you put this one in? H-A-G-I-O-I-S, hagios. Hagios means awful, awful thing. And relates to the saints. Remember, we'll see it, they call the saints hagios, which, by the way, equates the saints with deities. With deities. A hagios is a deific, is a deity type creature, is a hag. It is a creature, I'll say it again, just so you remember, a hagios is a creature that is so awful that when you see it, you fall on your face. So a gorgon, a harpy, a demigod, whatever it is, you fall on your face because it's so awful. I have it, let's see, I'll go over to this one. O-N-O-M-A, onoma, onoma. Onoma means name. And the reason I told you name is important There's two reasons name is important. The name is important in Hebrews, and I wrote it over here. Rin ka ibba shut. These are the 5 parts that the Egyptians thought that the human being was. You notice there's no sarks in here. Rin is the name. Ka is like the breast, suke, nefesh. Ib is pneuma, is basically the soul. They call it the heart, but they didn't know what the heart really was. Ba is motivation, is the motivation for life. And Shut is your image or shadow, is your picture, image, or shadow, what you look like, basically. So I guess that could be kind of close to sarks in a way. But in any case, Rin is the name. And I told you, who is really into the name? 2 groups. Egyptians are in the name because they see that part of the structure of creation of a being, of a person. Who else is big time in the name?
Hebrews?
The Hebrews, for what reason?
Name of God.
Because of the name of God. Yahweh, I said it. Luckily we don't know how it's really pronounced, so I'm okay, right? But Yahweh, the name of God, is not to ever be pronounced. And they never ever show it with the pointlets, the vowel pointlets, because they don't know how to pronounce it. When Jesus said the name of God out loud at the end of the 118th Psalm, by the way, that's what happens. Remember in John, I think it's in all 4 Gospels. It may be mostly in Luke, in Matthew, and John. But there is a point where Jesus, at the end of Shavuot, at the end of the festival booths, goes to the temple, and it gives they bring the ewer from the Pula Shalak, the living water from the Pula Shalak, which wasn't living at the time, it was still, and they bring it up and they splash it on the altar in a purification of the altar. And at that time they recite the 118th Psalm, and at the end of it, the high priest says the name of God, but he said it at the time under his breath. And at that time, in John specifically, Jesus stood up and said, "Blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord." Basically announced himself as God and the Messiah. Because that's what the end question of the 118th Psalm is. And by the way, we know from Josephus at the end of the 118th Psalm, the high priest would wait for the Messiah to announce himself. Anyway.
Well, wasn't Moses the only one that heard God say his name?
I'm not sure of that.
Did Moses say his name?
I think that,
God say his name to Moses? I don't know, I just vaguely remember that.
well, all right, I'll say this. God's name is, what is God's name? I am. I am.
The ultimate statement of fact.
Imo egi. In Greek, imo egi is I am. What do ancient cultures not use?
First person.
The first person imperative. We use the first person imperative like crazy because we are an advanced kind of culture, all right?
We're self-centered.
Because we are a self-centered culture, because now I'm not going to say ancient cultures are communist, socialist, or, they're not that way. But to an ancient culture, the worst thing that you can do is make a self-claim. In an ancient culture, the fact that you are a man is what makes you a man in an ancient culture?
What you wore?
Well, you might be naked. The fact is because you are a man,
Yeah.
right? There's no reason to say in any ancient culture, I am a man. Because your clothing, your body parts, your everything already expresses that. Likewise, you don't need to say, I'm wealthy. Why?
The things you never shows.
Yeah. You don't need to say, I am a king. You don't need to say, I am a senator. You don't need to say this, I am this, I am that. There is no I am.
If you misunderstand, you're dead.
And when you make an imperative in an ancient culture, the imperative means precisely and exactly what it says. So when Jesus says, I am, or when God says, I am, and by the way, Jesus did too. In Mark, for example, When he said, I am Imolegi in Mark, what happened? Remember?
Ballistic.
They picked up stones to
Well, they fell down on their faces
Yeah.
first, right? And then they were mad. Why did they fall on their face?
because the name of
Hagios.
Because anybody reading the Greek would have known that had any idea of the Hebrew culture, that when Jesus said ego eimi, he was stating an expression of the deity. And when you say the name of the deity, well, did they hear it? Who heard the name of the deity?
Cover your eyes, cover your ears, I can't hear this, it'll kill me.
Yeah, because they never spoke the word. According to Josephus, as a matter of fact, you were not that the second commandment is, do not say the name of God. According to the Jewish Talmud, okay? That the interpretation wasn't, we have interpreted don't curse, right? Don't blaspheme the name of God or take the name of God in vain. That's not what it means or says in Hebrew at all. It says do not say the name of God literally without meaning. In other words, the expression of the name of God could be spoken, but only in certain cases. Like, for example, in reading. And by the way, what did the Hebrews do? They didn't say the name of God. What did they do?
They gave it a different name.
They made up a name.
Yeah, they just gave different names for the characteristics.
They took the vowels. They took the vowels from Yahweh, and the vowels from Yahweh say Adonai. So when they hit that, they'd say Adonai. And in the New Testament era, the Jews would not write Theos. Theos. They would write TH --S or THS. And in Greek, that's theta trailing sigma. That's the name of God. And when they wrote Jesus' name out, Yeshua, they would leave out the vowels. The New Testament era writers would leave out the vowels. Today, if you look at an Orthodox Jewish text, they will never write this. They write G-D. They do not write the name of God. They do not speak the name of God. Very interesting stuff. And let's see, the final word here. Adikos. A-D-I-K or C-O-S. Adikos. Adikos, it's a negative. This is negative, so no dike, justice. Justice or right, no righteousness. I kind of gave it a thing here. This is a kind of a difficult word. Adikos means literally no justice or unjust. But this dikos in justice in Greek can mean self-evident. Self-evident. To them, justice, just like a logos, was self-evident. So, adikos can mean not self-evident. Not self-evident. And I think it comes into play because we're going to see a verse where it hits. So, looking at 8. Now, I've gotten better, but let's see, I've got 8 here. That which beareth thorns and briars is rejected and nigh unto cursing, whose end is to be burned. And Tammy brought up something that maybe you guys were thinking of because she was putting on her farmer hat. What do farmers do to make their fields more productive?
Fertilizer.
Well, burning in this part of the world is they burn for pasture.
They burn them off. Remember I told you that agriculture, the great key to agriculture that came out of the early period was when battle animals became farm animals because they were available and they began fertilizing. But the other great thing that they learned was you can burn a field, and if you burn the field, what happens to the nitrates? They get re-energized and you get refertilization of the field. And I hadn't thought about this, but this really fits it. But that which beareth thorns and briars is rejected and is nigh unto cursing, whose end is to be burned. My translation here is, but bears out a thorn and crowfoot, not approved, near enough to hold the down prayer, prayer of curses and malediction. The telos is the burning.
Burning is also a purification.
Burning can be a purification, but here where they're talking specifically about
Purifying the weeds,
Clearing.
killing the weeds.
land use. But the point is that when I burn off a field, I get
A more fertile.
Weed
a
control.
more fertile field. Yeah. And okay, let's continue with this. I want to get rid of these verses. I gave you all the references, okay? You got all those references in there because that's what I was going through. The first one was in Genesis. To Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, Adam, you must not eat it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life, and it will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you'll eat your food, etc., etc. In Deuteronomy chapter 29, and I won't read the whole of it, although remember, we're talking rabbinic context, right? Rabbinic context means you need to do what? The whole thing. Because remember, are there verses? No. In the original text, there's no verses. Are there chapters?
No.
Are there paragraphs?
No.
How about sentences?
No.
No. How about commas and exclamation points?
No.
No. There's none of that. So you got to read this in rabbinic context. I'll try to keep it in context. Deuteronomy 29, 21. The Lord will single him out from all the tribes of Israel for disaster according to all the curses of the covenant written in the book of the law. Your children who follow you in later generations and foreigners who come from distant lands will see the calamities that have fallen on the land and the diseases with which the Lord has afflicted it. The whole land will be a burning waste of salt and sulfur, nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing on it. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Adam, Zeboam, which the Lord overthrew in fierce anger. Let's see, 2 Samuel 23. 6. But evil men are all to be cast aside like thorns, which are not gathered, and with the hand. Whoever touches thorns uses the tool of iron or the shaft of the spear. They are burned up where they lie. These are the names of David's mighty men, etc., etc. That's an interesting one too, because that goes back to, remember the one about the tares in the wheat, where the guy spread the tares in the wheat, and God said, let's not pull it up, let's get later. This is very interesting stuff, isn't it, within its context. Isaiah 27. 1. In that day the Lord will punish with the sword, his fierce, great, and powerful sword, Leviathan the gliding serpent, Leviathan the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea. In that day sing about a fruitful vineyard. I, the Lord, watch over it. I water it continually. I guard it day and night, so that no one may harm it. I am not angry. If only there were briars and thorns confronting me, I would march against them in battle. I would set them all on fire. Or else let them come to me for refuge. Let them make peace with me. Yes, let them make peace with me. On the days to come, Jacob will take root. Israel will be bud and blossom and fill all the roll of fruit. Let's see. So, what I want to point out is this. In the Old Testament stuff we have that is analogous to this, what is the picture in the Old Testament? Here's our plot of land. What's that plot of land got in? Got some thorns, got some briars, and I'm Adam. And what am I doing? I'm cultivating and clearing, and I'm working my, sweater. I'm working by the sweat of my brow, and I'm making this land fruitful by my full efforts, right? Now, what's Jesus say? Let's say this is in the path. I like that, but here's the path, right? And what's Jesus say? Putting the seed out, right? Is there any cultivating going on? No, I'm putting the seed out. I put the seed, all the seed in the path, right? And even Jesus goes on, and we're pulling from lots of sources, but that's okay. But Jesus basically makes the comment that, okay, good seed equals good crop and harvest. Now some of it falls among the briars and the thorns, but what do I do if it's still good? I harvest it and then I burn up the thorns. Now I'm in Hebrews. And Hebrews is telling me what? The field has been burned off, right? And the seed, the gospel, has been put into it.
Renewed.
And what happens?
Good seed.
It grows. And how does it grow? The how does it grow part is what we're going to talk about next, because that's in the next one. So let's go to 9. Even, it's literally if also. Aikai. If also added, though is added. If also we lay low. Okay? Lay low. I don't know if everyone's here when I talk about, remember, I'm going to tell you in Greek how I'm going to tell you. Lay low is what? Just pleasant words. So I'm going to talk about the weather. I'm going to speak about it. If also we lay low like this, dear friends, literally, agapetos, loved by the gods, not dear friends, loved of the gods. We are patheo. We are convinced of better things, a better advantage, in your case, literally of you. Things that accompany, literally, to hold, rescue. In other words, before, well, we'll see what he says. This literally says, love to the gods, we are convinced better advantage of you to hold to salvation, if also we talk. If also we lay low. What's he saying? He's not using the word Legos. He's not saying I'm Legosoing you. He says, you are convinced, loved of the gods, we are convinced of better advantage to you to hold to rescue to salvation, if also we talk, if we converse with each other. What's he saying?
Talk about your faith, your belief.
Put it in everything.
Yeah.
Sprinkle it around.
Yeah. It's not, many times lelo is mistranslated, I think, as preaching. That's not the word. Lelo means, hey, how's the day? How are you doing today? How's your work? Is everything cool? Right? As opposed to a logical argument where I go, where I make a logical argument to you. So in other words, he's saying that how do I make this field grow? How's that magic, suppose, of God's growth of this spiritual thing or this thing going to happen?
Personal interaction.
It's because I'm interacting. Remember what I told you before? The writer even said, if your neighbors, if you can't understand what I'm writing to you, ask your neighbors. And in the beginning he says, I'm writing this to who? To whom? I'm writing it to the Romans, the Greeks. I'm writing it to those who are public servants of the Roman Empire. This isn't just appeal to logos. That's a big deal. And you notice the we in here. There is we in here. We are confident. We are convinced. Why would there be a we? This isn't the first occasion of a we. That means the authors are
Plural.
more than one. Yeah. Remember, I argued that I think Alexander, it's Alexander. Yes, Paul's. Apollos. I think Apollos, and many people think Apollos may have written this because it's very strongly in Alexandrian Greek and Alexandrian concepts. That Apollos was from Alexandria. So many think that are convinced that he wrote this, but he obviously wrote it with someone else. Sometimes they think that it was Barnabas or one of the other people that. This does not necessarily not see eye to eye with Paul. However, this is taking the Paulian concept of the ministry. Where? Paul believed that he was a missionary whether for good or ill, to the Gentiles. But what Gentiles did he mostly speak to? Greeks and Romans. He was focused in the Greeks and Romans, where I think Hebrews is taking this and extending it even further. It's extending it to the Egyptians, it's extending to probably the Scythians, it's extending it to us to a degree. This is why it's a really cool book for us. In any case, let's look at 10. And I think you'll see exactly what I've been trying to express to you. So, in 10, God is not atikos. Now you can look at it as God is not unjust, or you could say God is not self-evident. God is not self-evident or unjust, either way. The he will is added. Literally, the word is not forget, it's epithalatamaio, literally to lose out of mind. God will not lose out of his mind your ergon, your toil, and literally a cut, or the suffering, the agape, the love of God, you have ide kunimo, to indicate him toward his, not toward him, but toward his name, toward the onoma, his name. As you have diakoneo, been an attendant, been a deacon, literally, his hagios, to his hagios, and continue to help them. That was added. Literally, been an attendant, diakoneo. So it says it twice. I'll try and translate this for you. God is not self-evident to lose out of mind your toil and a suffering for the love of the gods you indicated in his name, as you have been an attendant to his awful, to his saints, and are an attendant. So put this into the context of what he's talking about. He's saying that the people, he's not saying that people are to be excluded because they might not have a complete, full understanding of the gospel. Right? He's telling them to talk to them about the gospel. The point is that he just called all of them what? Deacons. Diakonos. He called them all attendants. Now, we have this specific idea about what a deacon or a deaconess is, right? And I'll throw this out. I love to throw this out. People are always surprised. In Greek, okay, kind of a patriarchal society. Okay, we got that. It's a patriarchal society because, look, if I were a woman, I would definitely want to be in at least a Greek or Roman society where I am protected as a person, okay? Because in other cultures and societies, women are not protected, and that's a really ugly thing. That can be a horribly ugly thing for men or women, right? Think about it. Go ahead and think about this. I won't even have to describe it to you, but it is an ugly thing in any unprotected society for the weak or whatever. So if you thought that you were a bully in school, then you're probably okay. But if you thought that you were not a bully in school, then you're probably not okay, right? So in any case, in these cultures, the patriarchal cultures, if I were a deacon, my wife would be a deaconess. If I were a pastor, my wife would be if I were a presbyter, my wife would be a presbyteress. If I were, and I'm anglicizing it, right? If I were a fisherman, my wife would be a fishermaness. Because in the Greek worldview, the occupation of a person was collective. Right? You probably noticed it. Haven't you noticed it in old literature? Go back and read some of the old literature that you read when you were a kid. What did they consider the fishermen's sons and daughters? Well, they never separated them from the kids, right? The kids weren't separated from the father's occupation. If you were the son of a fisherman,
You're expected to become a parent.
yeah, you were a fisherman, right? If you were a boat, if you were working on a boat, if you were a farmer, son or daughter.
Family business.
Carpenter.
That's how your name came about. Your family name was the business of your parent.
Bingo, right? Farmers, carpenters, yeah, butchers, right? I mean, this is like, this is like the culture of the time, right? So I think it's really interesting. Remember, and I'll throw this out, there's that word, I love this word, skuios. Let's see, skuios. Skuios literally means a vessel, but it's also applied to a woman as the perfection of the vessel that is the man, when he, in his occupation. In other words, a Greek man was not considered whole unless he had a woman who was basically supporting him in his occupation. And that woman, the word is skuios, which also means a vessel, which we can take in within its context of, reproduction and other things. But think about this. In other words, without that tool, without that vessel, the man was considered unable to complete his business. And that word is used, by the way, in the New Testament within that context lots of times. Because especially in the Christian context, what was Paul and all the Christian writers, in your opinion, trying to do with the culture? Keep it the way it was?
No.
No, because in the Christian culture, Paul writes, all are equal.
No Jew, Greek,
No Jew, no Greek. And we see that as both mysterion, and we see that as a change in the culture, right? Mm-hmm. And we see, the ultimate is we did it, and then guess what we did? We've destroyed it in the modern era, because guess where that leads you? Eventually, if a woman is equivalent of a man, right, but has to be protected because they are a weaker vessel, and that's where this comes from, right? What do you have to do? Chivalry. You have to have chivalry, right? If a woman is so important that she has to be protected because she's equivalent to a man, you end up with chivalric love. You end up with chivalry. You end up with whole patterns of culture devoted to what? The protection of women, which we had up through the Victorian era in varying degrees of goodness or badness, right? Until the modern era.
Because of firearms.
What's that?
Because of firearms.
Well, that is absolutely true. Firearms made it not necessary
Technology.
for women to need as much protection, but it always is good to have two, right? Two with weapons. So I won't. And also, there's the other thing. My son-in-law made my daughter a weapon for like Valentine's Day, and I'm like, boy, that's a lot of trust, right? Because just saying, right?
I mean, what better vow than
What? Exactly. But what I think is really important is we can see within the cultural context of society and culture how these are positives. Do you think it's a positive? Right? It is a positive that we get rid of slavery. We become more equal in the way that we view life with others, right? And with the other sex. I mean, I think this is a positive thing because you can get you can get along a lot better together if you're not cavemen, right? Don't you think? Yes, because women would appreciate men not to be cavemen. That's why you have a civilizing influence of women, but that's a whole other question. Anyway, intent. God is not self-evident to lose out of mind your toil and a cut for the love of the gods you indicated in his name, as you have been attendant to a deacon, literally, to his saints, and are in attendance. And the word that is used here is awful. In other words, he's equating those who are Christians or teen hodos. Remember, this is not Christians. They are teen hodos. We are teen hodos. Teen hodos are what? And they are, if they are hagios, they are what?
Demigods.
They're demigods. And we know this because Jesus Christ's claim was what? You are adopted.
Sons of God.
You see, we like this. This is so euphemistic, isn't it? You're adopted sons and daughters of God. And by the word, it is daughters because the word is huios. Huios means offspring. So we're adopted offspring of God. Well, what does that mean?
You got the family business.
Well, if you're adopted by God, it means you're a demigod. Now, see, we like to, we're a euphemistic society. You know, it's all euphemistic. What do you think God thinks about this? Would he have said that if he didn't mean it?
Mormons love it.
Well, yeah, you know, some groups have taken it, you know, way too, well, maybe way out of context. Maybe we should take a little bit more. What does it mean if you are a demigod? Number one, can you agape?
Yes.
Oh man, you just solved a huge problem in Christianity, right? Agape is the love of the gods. You notice the writer uses the love of the gods within that context. And then he calls you a deity.
For those that are out there that aren't demigods yet, that they can't agape, and that's a current argument.
Yeah, but that's precisely true. How can you agape, right, if you're a human? This is an irony. It's an irony. It's a paradox. It is a paradox, and Greeks loved paradox. And so the thing is, does it ever tell you the telos of how to solve that paradox?
Well, I guess for me the question arises, like, so if I'm having this conversation or debate with a secular only human, and I say, you know, you can't agape, and they say, well, prove to me how you can or I can't. Personally, at this stage, I'm a little at a loss to actually show proof of that.
Well, here's the problem. Remember, number one, if you move outside of paradigms, you can't prove anything. You're totally out to lunch. If you move out of paradigms, remember that from the other class we talked about logic? So if you're working the same paradigm, you're okay. The problem when you're working usually with a person not trained in logic or reason, even if you're talking to whoever, right? You're skipping paradigms all over the time, and you're never going to get anywhere. That's number one. Number two, history is not a bumper sticker. So you can't give a bumper sticker answer to any of this stuff. And although I don't disagree with throwing bombs out, I mean, throwing a bomb out is great, because if you throw a bomb, what happens then? Well, it gives you an opportunity.
Generating discussion and dialogue.
Yeah, this is a goodness. So if you throw out the thing, you know, you can't agape, but I can. Who?
What about the bomb of Jesus as Lord, and he's also born of woman? That's demigod.
Well, yeah, I can give you that too, but the biggest deal of the biggest deal is, remember, you see, I didn't have to convince you that Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again.
That's proven fact.
In the Greek worldview, because they knew Christ has died, Christ has risen. The part they didn't know or couldn't prove, Christ will come again, right?
Take my word for it, he said.
Well, in the Greek worldview, this is a beautiful and rational argument, right? The problem today that I have, what is the problem I have today? It's a problem that comes down to everything.
It's all about me, to begin with.
Well, people used to know history. People used to be trained in history. They used to know, remember, I start the second class, the historical legal method, right? Historical legal method. Guess what? Unless you go to law school, they don't teach you historical legal method anymore. Right? They'll teach you a scientific method, but guess what they'll leave as an impression? What will the scientific method do for you? Prove everything, right? But you know you can't prove events that don't repeat themselves with historical method. They forget that. Now, how could you forget that? That's the primary reason for the historical method. I can only prove things that are repeatable, period, dot. So then, how do you get all these nutheads going, well, the historical method proves evolution. Historical method proves the beginning of the universe. Historical method proves, oh, what Napoleon ate on Thursday. No, it doesn't. The only way you know what Napoleon ate on Thursday is how?
It was documented.
Someone wrote it down.
Somebody wrote it down, yeah, and he happened to have arsenic with it, and that's why he's dead. But okay, look, the big deal is that the historical legal method, why, and I'll throw this out. Why do you think they took the historical legal method out of the schools? And when did they do it? Do you know when they did it? It really started leaving the school systems in the 1900s. They stopped teaching it. The reason they stopped teaching it, because it implicitly proves what? Christianity. The New Testament documents are irascible, they are verifiable, they are not, you cannot dispute them. If you teach, okay, go to Friends University or Newman. What's the first thing they'll pull out in the history of the New Testament period?
Josephus.
Josephus. Josephus didn't even see what he wrote about. He wasn't there. He was writing for the Romans. He was a traitor to his own people. He's writing for the Romans, and guess what he wrote good about? The Romans. Okay? Everything he wrote about was at least 50 years in the past. Never wrote about anything within his period. Why would you use that as a historical text?
Because it's not religious.
Because, well, there are a couple of cool things in Josephus that talk about Jesus. But guess what they say?
They say maybe.
Well, no, they're added. They were added by some, when they were copied, some monk just added.
But then they found the earlier texts and showed that even though some of it was added, it wasn't all added.
Well, and actually the stuff that was added was really not the stuff that we would consider. The things that were added were like, they put in, they actually corrected his grammar, right? And they fixed it, especially in the Latin versions. But in any case, yeah, when you go back and look at the earliest texts, that's why the majority text, right, of the New Testament, there are 20,000 documents of the New Testament. There is no other document in antiquity that's even close to that. Okay, 20,000 documents. And guess what? They vary a little bit, but they're pretty close. And if you know anything about them, they're about 95% in their closeness. Most of the problems are grammatical, or they have spelling or words, you know. That's all yeah, everybody spells perfectly, right? Yeah, dictionaries weren't invented until like, what, the 18s, 17s, whatever? Anyway. 11. We want, literally, epithumio, to set the heart upon. Literally, this is the scent of the sacrifice. Epithumio is the scent of the sacrifice. I should give that to you as a word today. One of my favorite words. But to set the heart upon, literally the scent of the sacrifice, each of you to show, indicate by word or act, the same diligence, dispatch, to the very end, plethora, to carry out fully in evidence, in order to make your elpis, your hope, your expectation sure. Literally, archiri, until the terminus. Literally, until the terminus, the telos. So, in Hebrew, let's see. Here it is in King James, and we desire that every one of you do show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope unto the end. This is my translation. But we set our hearts upon the scent of the sacrifice. Each of you to indicate by word or act the same dispatch, and to carry out fully in evidence, with expectation until the telos, literally the point aimed at as a limit. You know, I told you that the point of the author is to tell you to talk about the gospel with other people, to talk about it with your friends, with your relatives. What he says is, don't sweat the small stuff. Just yak about it. Even if you don't fully understand it, your point is to yak about it and talk about it, because that builds your understanding to the telos, to the terminus, literally to the archiri. I want to talk about this word epithumia. This is one of the most important words in Greek, probably. It is always mistranslated, or is usually mistranslated. It is translated very nicely here, to set the heart upon. It is usually translated as lust, like lust as in sexual lust or whatever lust. It's more akin to Lust, as in German, to desire. But this is the best I've ever seen a translation, to set the heart upon. But we did get to 11, you see? Do you see?
It seems like he's saying, keep the eternal perspective in mind in all that you do. You know, don't lose focus on the other things, but in all your interactions and everything, keep that end point.
Bingo. And don't not talk about it because you believe you don't fully comprehend it. You see the point here?
That's a problem with a lot of people not wanting to evangelize, like, oh, I can't do it really, really well, or
Well,
have
and
all the answers, or.
Well, I would say this, you know, we get all hooked up about evangelizing, which is good, right? You should, right? But that's not what he's saying. How do you evangelize?
All the time.
Yeah, by interacting with people. So you don't have to go and throw a tract at them, right? And say, you're going to die, right? Or you're going to go to hell. See? Because what will that do?
Turn them off.
It turns off, it destroys your interaction with the people. The point is, if you act the way you think you should act, and just discuss it. Like, for example, if I even go up to someone who's a coworker and I ask them a question of theological or doctrinal or spiritual import, right? Where do I go? No, I'm happy because I just asked their opinion, right? And even if they don't have the right opinion,
Then you know where to start with them next time.
right? And if I
Understand
keep,
where they're coming from.
yeah, and actually the Socratic method is asking questions, right? So if you ask questions and you get responses, where are you going? You
Plus,
move.
people like to be asked, they like to, I don't know, they like to be interactive with.
You like to think that you care about what they think and want to know what they believe.
Exactly. That is, I think, precisely right. Yeah, I hate to make this a treatise for good management and good interaction with human beings, but I think that's really what the Hebrew writer is trying to show us. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray that you look at us this week. In your name we pray, amen.